Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from The Athletic. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, we've been having some fun tonight, haven't we?
Yeah, you were about to ask how have I been doing, and you knew that answer wouldn't be standard.
I think the answer would be the sort of thing that gets us kicked off of iTunes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But we get to watch the Thursday night football. Well, I do get to watch the Thursday night football game between Andy Dalton and Joe Flacco. So I've got that to look forward to.
The battle of the elites.
Yeah. So
I'm
doing just friggin' amazing. Yeah.
I was doing some looking at the Thursday night schedule, looking for kind of the worst matchups or the sort of thing that you would want to avoid. And when we do the live show in New York, the game that night is the Arizona Cardinals versus the Denver Broncos. So Vikings quarterback versus Vikings quarterback if Bradford's eyes are still playing.
Right.
I was like, wow, that's kind of glad I'm going to miss that one. I don't think I was going to be able to sit through all of that anyway. So welcome to this episode, which is going to be a little bit of an odd one. We've had multiple technical issues throughout the afternoon and evening trying to record this, so it's going to be a little bit different than most of the preview episodes where we end up having a guest. We actually did have a guest, a fantastic guest, and then the interview decided not to tape. So we will be kind of conveying the information that we received from her and talking about her in just a few minutes. So we have that. We've got the mailbag. We will definitely be talking about Roger's declaration that he was not using any sort of pain pill or any sort of pain drugs, which Arif and I both are questioning the whole Southern accent thing then.
Right.
But
Money!
Exactly. He went full Favre. You never go full Favre. But before all of that, we just wanted to thank you guys once again for listening, for sharing the episodes, for going out and helping us out quite a bit. We are looking forward to our to the New York trip and a couple other things happening later this fall, later this winter. So again, thank you guys so much for helping keep the lights on, keeping the Loch Ness Monster at bay, and making it so that this podcast can be ad-free. We do have a couple of quick shout-outs before we begin. First things first, I wanted to apologize to Thomas Anderson Jr., who I apparently called him the wrong name last time. So via Patreon, Thomas Anderson Jr. I did it again, and I'm not even going to edit it out. I'm the one making the mistake. Thomas Armstrong Jr.
Wow.
Thomas Armstrong Jr., thank you so much for donating. Apologize that I'm an idiot. Kirk Lindgren via PayPal. He gives the message, slap Dusty for me. I listen to every episode. Thank you for what you do. In South Carolina, you don't find many Vikings fans to talk about the Vikes. That is where you guys come in. Thank you, Kirk. We are happy to fill that void for you. Andrew Sherman says, tremendous job. I've been listening to the show for a few years now. Use this to stab that Loch Ness Monster right in its life. Question, though. I recently read the Deadspin article about why your team sucks. Unfortunately, now whenever I see an interview with Kirk Cousins, I keep thinking the word dink. Is there any way I can stop this from continuing?
Nope. You're doomed.
No. You're pretty much doomed. Although I can't look at him without thinking of his RV. So I don't know if that's just like my cross to bear, something I'm going to have to deal with at some point. But I don't know, dude. You're kind of on your own on that one. I don't know if we can necessarily help with that. But again, thank you guys so much for supporting the show, for helping us out. If you too would like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and you can donate there. That's more of a subscription based thing. You can do $1 a month, $3.50 a month, $5, whatever amount you feel this show is worth, you can donate there and we will appreciate every penny that comes through. Again, thank you guys so much. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode and donate to the show that way. So, all of that aside, again, welcome to this episode. We will be previewing the matchup with the Packers. And Arif, let's talk about that guest.
So we had Michelle. I should have asked how to spell her or pronounce her last name. I want to say Bruton from Aussie.com. She covers the NFL. She used to cover the Packers exclusively for a while, I believe, for Bleacher Report. See, I'm a bad interviewer. I didn't even make sure all these details were correct. But she's been writing some pretty great stuff for a while, so I decided to ask her about the Packers. And she gave us a pretty thorough breakdown of the Packers' offense and defense. I started with the defense because I think that's maybe less covered, but kind of interesting. And then we went to the offense. Unfortunately, because the interview died, all I can do is paraphrase her. So if I get something wrong, probably my fault. But she was fantastic. She ran us through the defensive line, the linebackers, the defensive backs, and what to expect from the Mike Pettin defense. Talked a lot about. So we could start with what she said about the defensive line. So this has been kind of a meme, I think, in Vikings Twitter and Packers Twitter. So this article that Rob Domofsky at ESPN wrote came out recently that, and I'll link it in the show notes, that compared all the position groups between the Vikings and the Packers, and he talked to, it sounds like 4 or 5 scouts based on the article. And the scouts apparently agreed that the Vikings have better players at every position group except for quarterback. And so, which, I feel like that's intuitive. It's been pretty close to that way for a long time.
Should be expected for the most part, yeah.
Right, yeah. And the thing about the Packers is that without Aaron Rodgers, they they turn into a pumpkin, right? So the one area where I feel like Packers fans have pushed back an incredible amount is the interior defensive line, which is not a position group so much as it is a subgroup of a position group. But, they thought it was really important because Kenny Clark is playing really well as a nose tackle, and Mike Daniels is phenomenal, right? So I get it. They're both good players, and I would say, last year that was probably true. I like Tom Johnson a lot, but I think that Mike Daniels is not comparable. And even though Linval Joseph, in my opinion, is much better than Kenny Clark, you get I think the difference between Mike Daniels and Tom Johnson was pretty extraordinary. This year, they've got, the Vikings have Sheldon Richardson, who's playing out of his mind, at least with 1 week under our belts. With
a very small sample size, he was rocking everyone's world.
Yeah, I mean, with very small sample size, he's Aaron Donald, right? He played really well. So with that in mind, I think the Vikings probably have a stronger interior defensive line. The comparison is not important. What's important is that they do actually have a very good interior defensive line. Those 2 players I mentioned, she also brought up, of course, Sheldon Richardson's former teammate, Muhammad Wilkerson, who has experience playing in Mike Pettin's defense. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about the Pettin defense up front with Nick Perry and Clay Matthews is that they tend to run a bunch of stunts. So tackle end stunts, or the tackle in the end, switch which lane they're rushing, which gap they're rushing. It confuses the protection for the offensive lineman, can kind of confuse the quarterback too if he's setting the protections, and it may enable blitzes a little bit easier because it tends to create one-on-one matchups, something that they like to do. Mike Pettin, his history is, he's a former defensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. He was the defensive coordinator under Rex Ryan for the New York Jets, and he was a head coach of the Cleveland Browns, which that didn't go as hot, but he's run a top 10 defense every time he's been a defensive coordinator. And so I think the Packers expect big things. And I think up front is kind of where you might see a lot of those things. Unfortunately, they don't really have much of a pass rush, right? Clay Matthews is kind of done.
He's a little past his prime. And as we saw on Sunday night, still pushing people a little dirty.
Yeah, he might be. Yeah. That's not a bad way to put it. He also apparently keeps missing tackles. We saw a big missed tackle against Mitchell Trubisky on Sunday night, which that was a pretty funny touchdown, at least from my perspective. And, it feels like the pressure that's being generated is somewhat manufactured, and I think that's a credit to Pettin. So that was kind of that discussion there. In sub packages, they'll run something called a bear front. And so sometimes they'll get Muhammad Wilkerson on the field. And a bear front is, I think it's named after the 46 defense Chicago Bears 1985-86. What happens is you've got 3 tackles lined up directly over the guard, center, and guard, and that creates one-on-one matchups for your edge rushers. Seattle used to do it a lot too. It's something to kind of watch out for. And one-on-one matchups are obviously, people are not very confident in the guard situation for the Vikings. They've got a backup center in there as good as he was in pass protection last week. It's something to kind of watch out for because centers don't tend to get one-on-one matchups all that often. They tend to, double team, which is why they don't tend to give up as many sacks as guards. So that's, something to be careful about. We also talked about, of course, the linebacker situation for the Packers. So not just Nick Perry and Clay Matthews on the edge, but who they've got kind of up front. So they're missing Oren Burks, the rookie from Vanderbilt who tested through the roof, that they kind of expected to start next to Blake Martinez. And Martinez is a pretty underrated linebacker. He led the league in tackles last year, something Michelle mentioned, that no one kind of talked about him. But he's a pretty good linebacker. It's kind of Antonio Morrison was a big worry for the Packers. She mentioned that, he didn't play as poorly as I think a lot of Packers fans expected last week. It's still something that as a Vikings, a watcher, observer, you'd think that the Vikings would target. You kind of want them to target, see what Antonio Morrison can do. So primarily, she was telling me that he's mostly a run stuffer, which is why the Packers were in dime defense so much. They've got, they take a linebacker off the field. They keep Blake Martinez on the field. They take Antonio Morrison off the field, and they put another defensive back in there, either a safety or a cornerback. And in this case, it's a cornerback because they've got a ton of young corners. They've got Kevin King. They've got Jair Alexander. They've got Josh Jackson. And then they brought back Tramon Williams. So they've got a ton of corners. You kind of expect the Vikings to target Antonio Morrison whenever they have that opportunity. That's kind of the linebacker situation. And I think that the Vikings should be able to generate some pretty good room in the run game, kind of unlike last week, if they kind of attack the outside a lot and force the linebackers to be involved. Inside, it's going to be a little bit harder, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Dalvin Cook take a couple of runs to the outside. After that, we actually the first thing we discussed was the secondary because they're a really talented group.
Which is an odd thing to say about the Packers. They're not necessarily known for having a really talented secondary, or I guess an effective one.
Right. Yeah. I feel like the Packers for the years have had a bunch of players who have a bunch of potential, and at one season showed a lot of talent, but they never put that all together all in one season, right? So back when they had Devon House had a crazy good season one year and then just kind of didn't repeat it. Tramon Williams, before he left, had one really crazy good season. Morgan Burnett at safety, had a couple of really good seasons, but never seemed to align with the other corners. It's weird, but this year, both Josh Jackson and Jair Alexander look really good. They were very active in the run game, both of them. She mentioned that they accounted for a really good chunk of the stops, the run stops, that you don't really expect from a quarterback. They're comfortable both man and zone coverage. They've got kind of different physical skill sets. So they might match up against different receivers in different ways. But Mike Pettin likes to change between man and zone coverage. He also does pattern match coverages that requires versatile corners, and those two kind of have that ability. So that's something to watch out for. Obviously, the Vikings, I would say, would have an advantage in the wide receiver cornerback matchup here, just because they've got such a dynamic duo. But it's a better secondary than I think people are used to seeing from the Packers. So that's something to watch out for. The Clinton Dix question was really interesting to me. I asked her, hey, his rookie year, he looked really good. He looked like a big hit. Then he just kind of fell off the face of the planet. Was that maybe Dom Capers' fault? Is that who he actually is? Is Mike Pettin going to kind of revive him? And she's saying, the evidence kind of tells us that he might be more of a problem than an asset right now. Because he missed a ton of tackles in this game against the Bears. He wasn't always getting to his landmark in time. That one play that I think a bunch of people memed on Twitter, where Trey Burton is wide open in the end zone and Trubisky staring right at him, and then just chooses to dump it off for -2 yards to a running back instead. At that moment, at that still that's going kind of around, he's not actually quite open because Clinton Dix can close down on him. But on that play, he was wide open before Clinton Dix responded, and he kind of lost his guy in coverage. And those are the kinds of things that have been kind of worrying Packers fans about what Clinton Dix can do. So they may end up investing in another safety kind of in the future. But yeah, those are kind of the factors on defense, and obviously it kind of revolves around how good that secondary can be, and Pettin's going to try and kind of work the other players that they have to accommodate and kind of maximize the potential of the defensive backs.
So the defense under their new coordinator is still kind of shaking itself out and all. What do we know as far as like tendencies of this new defense?
Yeah, with only one week, we're not getting a ton. I asked her about sort of the ways that they're generating pressure, and she's mentioning that there's a kind of a bunch of blitzes. I went through the PFF data for what that defense has been doing with like their non-edge players. So I looked at their inside linebackers, safeties, and cornerbacks to see how often they blitzed. And on 43 dropbacks, they blitzed 13 times, which is about league average. And you kind of expect more. But what's really interesting is that it's not so much that they keep on sending, linebackers up the middle or cornerbacks or safeties up into blitzing, which they'll still do. I mean, they blitzed Alexander, they blitzed Jackson. They keep on sending different people from different directions. But it seems to be that they're more kind of concentrating on those stunts that I mentioned earlier, switching the defensive tackles around after the snap, or switching a defensive tackle and a defensive end, or linebacker rather, to kind of create unusual or unique pressure that's going to require a lot of communication from the offensive line. So that's one of the tendencies. Another tendency that I've kind of noticed is that, at least against the Bears, we saw a lot of cover one, and not all the time, and we saw some cover two, but the cover one basically gives you an extra player, right? Because if you're in cover one man, you've got one free safety, and then you've got 5 players kind of lined up man to man against the other 5, skill players, and then you've got 4 players rushing the passer. That leaves you one extra person. Often you can go into a robber or a floater situation where you've got that second safety just kind of manning underneath, or just kind of following the play. He's kind of got his own assignment, as it were. He can just kind of do whatever he wants. He can freelance a little bit. Or you can have that extra player blitz, or you can bracket coverage or trap coverage underneath. And Pettin has done all of those things where he's had that extra person either, be a robber or blitz, or kind of get underneath some routes, and, to the strength of the formation, and see if they can pick off a pass. So those are the kind of tendencies that, to watch out for, based on, what I've seen and the discussion I had with Michelle.
It is kind of odd looking just back at the Chicago game, just how ripped up they were in the first half, just destroyed, torched even. And then looking at the second half of the game, was that more of a situation of Chicago, I say, pooping the bed, or was this something that they were just able to kind of figure themselves out and keep them to nothing?
She mentioned this actually, that they kind of made a bunch of adjustments at halftime, maybe in response to Aaron Rodgers going down. But yeah, I think
if Deshaun Kaiser is going to be our quarterback, we have to be better than this, guys.
Yeah, right, exactly. I think also some of it, I think Chicago's play calling just kind of stopped. It was so interesting, especially in the first quarter, during the scripted portion. It was so interesting what they did. And then they just didn't do any more interesting stuff.
Oh, it remained interesting, but in the exact opposite kind of way. It was more like the car crash, and you just wanted to see if the car was actually going to turn into flames, or if it was just going to sit there smoking all day. Right?
Yeah. There were moments where the Packers drop into a super basic cover 2, and the Bears offense, they've got a 2x2 set, so they've got 4 receivers running routes, and neither side had an answer to cover 2. It was just, they were all vulnerable to cover 2, and so no receivers were open, right? Because every receiver is accounted for. They didn't run a route that would have let them get open against one of the most basic defenses in the NFL, and so Trubisky had to scramble. And it's just why? Why wouldn't you have an answer to that coverage, either as an option route for your receivers, or if you don't have option routes in your offense, which I feel like you always should, where you adjust your routes based on the coverage you're seeing. If you don't have option routes, then you should have, a zone beater on one side and a man beater on the other side. So you've got two sets of route concepts. But instead, they just called basically a dead play, and Trubisky had to scramble. It was weird to see.
Yeah, there was a lot of Trubisky is not the sort of person you want running with your football, and second only at this moment to Aaron Rodgers trying to run with your football, because that wasn't working well either on Sunday, but especially at the end of it. Is there anything else that we should know specifically about this version of the Packers defense?
Just basically to expect the unexpected. I mean, the Buffalo Bills and especially the Jets defense that Patton's coming from, they did all kinds of stuff. Crazy stuff. That, they'd have everybody standing up, right? And so you couldn't identify, who's going to rush or not. Or they'd only have one down lineman or something like that. They would, overload one side and zone the other side or something, just like weird stuff and stuff that's kind of difficult to identify. So it's tough, right? Because, Cousins is the kind of quarterback where you kind of always want to have a plan in place for every contingency, right? Because he's not an improviser. But you don't know what those contingencies are going to look like, and you can't plan for everything. And so you can say, hey, if the coverage looks like this, do this. If it looks like this, do this. If it looks like this, do this. And this and this and this. And you could have 8 plans covered, and they'll go with the 9th, right? So it's tough. But yeah, mostly just kind of expect the unexpected and be sure to have, general rules or guidelines or principles that you can use to kind of consistently answer all the different kinds of things the defense can throw.
What do you think Dalvin Cook is going to be able to accomplish against that D-line?
I would say that the interior defensive line, he's probably not going to get a ton of yards up the middle, especially with how the offensive line was run blocking last week. But I would say, on the outside, he should find, a lot of space. I think that the tackles can do really well against Perry and Matthews. I think that if you're kind of running those outside zones, you can kind of get ahead of those defensive linemen. And they run a bunch of weird fronts. They run an under front as well as a bare front and an over front. And some of those fronts, they're very difficult to block up in terms of pass protection, but they can leave kind of holes in the run game. And so if they can kind of identify when or what those fronts are going to look like, they can figure out sort of how they want to run up the inside if they need to.
And I suppose if they're going to be running out on the outside, it would be a good idea to get Diggs involved in that sort of thing, since he's been used before in the sort of end around.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they had a couple of end arounds or even reverses planned, just to take advantage of how soft that defense might look on the outside. But you have to remember also, Michelle mentioned how good the cornerbacks are in run support. So you can't just run at the corner. So that's something you kind of have to figure out kind of your alleys.
So as far as our receivers go, who do you think is going to be able to have the biggest opportunity out there?
I mean, personally, I think Diggs matches up against Josh Jackson really well, but not as well against Jair Alexander. He should still consistently win most of the time. I wouldn't be surprised if Thielen's kind of a better matchup for those two corners and for Kevin King just overall, even if Diggs might be kind of the better overall receiver. I guess I'd say probably Thielen, but it kind of depends on what those matchups look like.
And of course, Kyle Rudolph running across the middle may be able to accomplish something as well.
Yeah, right. With how bereft they are at linebacker.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the Packers offense, and you would be an absolute fool to think that Aaron Rodgers is missing this game. You would have to be a complete idiot. If he wasn't on pain medication on Sunday night, which, fine, if you say so. I'm sure there's no HIPAA thing that would really require him to say something there, but if that's the case, then he'll just be all drugged up for this one then. And it makes sense. So Aaron Rodgers is the Terminator, cannot actually be taken down. Is he more the Terminator or the T-1000? Because he just keeps coming towards you.
I guess the T-1000 is probably better, right? Terminator was probably closer to like Peyton Manning. Aaron Rodgers has like, kind of more tools available to him.
Yeah. I think that's accurate.
Yeah. So he's the T-1000.
You can shoot a shotgun at him and he just looks at you funny. Like, really? That's what you're going to do? All right. So he has obviously amazing talents and qualities, and he will likely be limited in his mobility. And we had talked a little bit about this on the show earlier in the week, how if this is the case, he may just have to take a bunch of snaps and shotgun and try to pick us apart that way. How does his injury change their plans on offense? And this could include their run game.
They might be kind of more aggressive about the run game. Unfortunately, with Aaron Jones injured, they'll have to go with Jamal Williams. Michelle was telling me, not to underrate Jamal Williams. He might not be the primary choice heading into the season, but he played pretty well, and he's got some power and some shiftiness in him that should allow him to get some movement. So I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of went into the running game. They've got some diversity in the running game too. You've got Ty Montgomery, who's obviously, former receiver, so he could be a receiving back. It's something to kind of watch out for. But I still think, it's still the Packers and it's still Aaron Rodgers. Even if he can't move around, they're probably going to primarily rely on him being able to pass the ball. The problem, of course, is that, the interior of their offensive line is pretty weak. It's not as good as it ever, as it had been in the past with Sitton and Lang. She mentioned, right, that's probably the biggest concern going into the game with Aaron Rodgers hurt like that, is that with an interior offensive line that, is, liable to give up that kind of pressure up the middle, that they're going to have to go to a quick game. Unfortunately, Devontae Adams is hurt. I don't know if he's coming back yet, but, he's kind of their primary receiver. For them, they like what they saw in Geronimo Allison. Obviously, he had the big splash play. She is not super confident that we've got like the old Randall Cobb back. It might be a fluke, but it's also something to watch out for. And he should be good in the quick game, specifically, with screen passes and things like that. They'll want to get rid of the ball quickly. They might be confident in David Bakhtiari up against Everson Griffin. They might not be, but they probably are. And Brian Bulaga, he's had some success in the past. I mean, he got torched by Khalil Mack, but I mean, Daniil Hunter's good, but he's no Khalil Mack. So we'll see, what'll happen at the edge. But if their primary concern is going to be pressure, they won't be able to roll away from it. The Vikings won't have to worry about, opening up rush lanes for him as much. So they're going to have to get rid of the ball quickly. So that'll mean slants. I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings responded by going into press coverage a lot, which is something that obviously they're very good at with Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes, who are both very physical, very technically sound at this point, corners that should be good in press coverage, and both have really good recovery, so they can be comfortable in press coverage without having too much help over the top. I wouldn't be surprised if the Packers tried to go to a quick game and the Vikings ended up forcing them into, third and long. And they're forced to have a deeper drop back and kind of get, destroyed in the pass protection game. Thing is, Aaron Rodgers is so accurate that great coverage can often turn into a loss for the defense. So you're still just going to have to watch out for all of that.
And pretty much it's just being a situation of being able to take what Aaron Rodgers ends up giving you as far as the defense is concerned.
Right.
Which could mean a decent day for Harrison Smith. He has a nice little history of picking off passes against the Packers. But as far as our defense is concerned, who do you think is going to end up playing the bigger role in the pass rush here? Do you think it's going to be Sheldon Richardson, or do you think it's going to be somebody else?
I mean, traditionally it's the edge rushers, and as good as Sheldon Richardson was last week, you can't expect him to perform like that every week until he's established a reputation of being, a J.J. Watt or an Aaron Donald or at least a Geno Atkins, right?
Lies. He wants that. He's going to get signed to some ridiculous contract. We're going to get rid of Barr. We're just going to build a statue to Sheldon Richardson. If he keeps playing like he did week one, I mean, if he
keeps playing like he did week one, he's the best tackle in the league.
I did enjoy Danny Kelly's tweet. It was like, everybody who's a Seahawks fan, look away from the screen for just a second. Sheldon Richardson's been a god in Minnesota for week one.
I think traditionally you'd expect the edge rushers to, but with the pass protection they have on the edge, and with how Sheldon Richardson's performed, and with how weak those guards are, you might see a lot more pressure up the middle than you're used to seeing. So the primary pass rush might come from Richardson. We'll see.
So their receivers have changed a little bit this year, and there's Jimmy Graham on the inside. We just got burned by the 49ers tight end. Should we expect a little bit of work on coverage for him?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. So Michelle was mentioning one of the reasons the receivers had such a big game for the Packers is because of how focused and intent the Bears were in shutting down Jimmy Graham. He kind of adjusted their coverages. They doubled him a lot. And they kind of oriented their defensive coverage game around, where Jimmy Graham was lined up. So he didn't end up getting a ton of targets, but the other receivers did. I think Graham ended up with 3 targets and 3 receptions. That's going to be an interesting storyline to look at going forward. The Vikings obviously gave up 90 yards to George Kittle. They probably should have given up 120 if he doesn't drop that pass. If the problem is like how they play tight ends, that's something to watch out for. It seems like the problem is actually just that Kyle Shanahan is a really phenomenal play designer, and then Kittle's pretty good, and it's not really a matchup issue for the Vikings. There was a pretty good tweet, I'll link that in the show notes, that went over how Shanahan set up that deep shot to George Kittle, and it was, they're a zone running team, so they run, a couple of zone runs to the outside to that direction, then they run a play action off of it, and it's a pretty normal play action. I think it's a flood concept, and then after that, they run that same play again, play action, flood concept off the zone. And then that's when they have Kittle slip inside. He's initially just kind of dragging across the formation like he did on the prior 2, and then he spins up. And so it was really just Shanahan set up this excellent play for Kittle to get open, for the Vikings to start biting on tendencies. And that's kind of how he got open there. That said, he still got 90 yards, right, on not that play. So it's something to think about, to watch for. Kendricks, I think, had an unusually poor game in coverage. Barr had an all right game. He didn't end up covering Kittle all that often. It's something to pay attention to. I wouldn't be surprised if Devontae Adams is injured. I wouldn't be surprised if Xavier Rhodes just covers Jimmy Graham the entire game. I think that's the best matchup you could have. Other than that, you could put Harrison Smith on him. He is a little bit weaker in man coverage than he is in basically every other part of his game. So you kind of be sacrificing a really great piece of your defense to have him do that. I don't know. The Vikings do have some extra corners, so they might want to put a corner on him. But for me, I think that it might be best to just treat Jimmy Graham like normal and make him prove that he's still elite.
I was going to say, you end up in that sort of situation, or the flip side of that, you end up putting somebody on Mike Hughes on him, which, don't get me wrong, Jimmy Graham is beginning to show his age, but if you end up putting Mike Hughes on him, I wonder just how quickly Hughes would end up getting exposed by that whole, veteran, old man speed sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, he could be in that situation.
Yeah. Is there anything else on the Packers offense that we should be concerned about other than their general?
Obviously, the Aaron Rodgers question is going to loom large, but, we mentioned Randall Cobb, we mentioned Jimmy Graham, we mentioned Geronimo Allison pretty briefly. Jamal Williams should be an effective runner. For the most part, I think we covered most of the offense. Then, of course, just have to remember, Aaron Rodgers might be a wizard.
It's very possible, actually, after watching him the last several years. They haven't actually said what the real injury is and whether they keep saying that we're going to know on Saturday whether he's going to end up playing. You'd be foolish to think that Favre was going to end up missing this, although I've enjoyed the interviews this week from people like Anthony Barr and Sheldon Richardson saying that they're going to hit him just as hard as before and maybe just, have a finger off him or something. If you're scared about this sort of thing, go to church.
Yeah, that one was a good one. I think that was Richardson.
Yeah, that one was Richardson. I think Anthony Barr was like, I'm going to hit him as hard as I did before. Just maybe not press down as much when I get up on a. It's like, yeah, if we get to him, that would be fantastic. You get the feeling though his release time on these passes is going to be something like half a second, where he just gets it and throws it somewhere else, like completely avoiding the Vikings pass rush at that point. Really, just at the mercy of our corners. Yeah,
I totally expect just like 0.5 seconds from snap to throw. Like, it's going to be really fast.
Yeah, you're just sitting there, and it's going to be like it's going to be like Neo from the Matrix. Like you're not even watching his hand at that point. You just notice the ball is gone. Like, where the hell did he? All right, that's 5 yards. Fine, we'll try to get him next time. So I guess the last question I have as far as the Packers game is concerned is we will be playing in Green Bay. Should anybody be mooning the fans back this time? I'm just looking for despicable acts at this point.
Yeah, I'm pro despicable act. So
let the record show that Arif is very strongly for despicable acts. That makes sense. Anything else before we wrap up the Packers preview?
No, I think we're good.
So can we explain the Southern accent then? Because if he wasn't high, I'd really like to know how he acquired a Southern accent.
It's so weird. Shucks, man, this is worth to nothing. Just trying to play football out there. What hurts? Oh yeah, it's my knee.
It's my knee. Not money, not money, not money. No, money. That was his response. Like, really? Maybe he's just gone full Hollywood and has decided that like every interview he's going to be doing different like accents, and that could be kind of entertaining after a while, or just slightly less nauseating than his current string of commercials. If he was going to have the accent, he should at least have the mustache with it too.
Yeah, I mean, he's had the mustache before without the accent, so now that he has the accent, he has to bring the mustache back.
It's the only thing. It's the only way this works in my head. So look forward to Aaron Rodgers and his new Southern accent. And if he ditches it for this game, we're all going to call him Hollywood. Like he's just totally pandering to everybody else here. I'm convinced that he was loaded, but I guess we'll see. So that is going to be it for the discussion on the Packers game. We will be reviewing the hopeful Vikings victory over the Packers early next week, and then we will have a guest on the next episode, and hopefully that interview will not break anyone's computer. So, all that aside, let's hit the mailbag. We don't have a lot of stuff to talk about in the mailbag, but we do have some that we should go over here. Eric Thompson says, "Will Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams play? Cite specific examples and show your work."
They will play. Well, I don't know about Davante Adams, but I expect he'll play. I would show my work, but I lost it all in the interview.
Yeah. Let's blame that.
But my dog ate my homework.
If we're looking for specific examples, we could point to last Sunday as proof that Aaron Rodgers will apparently play through anything as long as he has enough adrenaline running through him. Now, they said it was adrenaline.
It was adrenaline, yeah.
It was adrenaline that got him through. So are they like doing the shot from Pulp Fiction and like slamming it into the heart to like try to get him to kind of get him moving? Is it kind of like a heroin overdose? Is that like what a minor tear of an ACL does? I'm not entirely sure.
Maybe. I think it's Mission Impossible 3, where they're saying Ethan Hunt is rescuing a fellow agent, and she's been drugged, so he injects adrenaline directly into her heart, and she gets up and at him, and she's got all of the accuracy and cognitive ability, and just like everything is there. She's a super agent again. And when I first watched this, I made fun of this. And then I was watching with a med student, and the med student was like, "No, that's pretty accurate."
Like, what?
So, right? I was like, wait, really? We got to get adrenaline. It's like, no, Arif, you have to have already been a super agent for the. Oh, well, that's BS.
Yeah, that's sort of along the line as like an actual person who does code watching a movie where they're quote unquote hacking and being like, oh, actually, they're not just smashing keys; they're actually doing something there. I was like, wait, what? Really?
It's like, okay. Yeah, adrenaline's magic. Maybe actually, wouldn't it be funny if they just injected him with adrenaline, and when he said I was on adrenaline, he wasn't talking about like, the normal adrenaline that like pumps through you during a game.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, I just took an EpiPen and boom.
I wasn't down because somebody like landed on my leg. What actually happened is there was a peanut shell on the field and it rubbed against my ankle. And the ankle blew up 3 sizes, and I had to, get the EpiPen out and inject that, and it slowly comes down, but it affected my mobility. So, and apparently,
and it gave me Southern accent.
Yeah, on the side effect on the commercial, it even says that may induce Southern accents. So, who knows? Kenneth Allen asks, how do you think they'll try to handle Rodgers this week? It probably won't be as important to contain him, so do they try to do the straightforward pressures? I'm worried Rodgers will pull a Brady and avoid it all in the pocket.
So I don't think that they should blitz all that often. I think they should trust their defensive line to find ways to get to the quarterback, especially against that weak interior. Maybe, do some line stunts, just kind of like throw Pettine's game back at him and create one-on-one matchups with like unusual fronts and stuff like that. But I don't want to create holes in coverage for him to be able to exploit because he's going to find them. Like Aaron Rodgers historically has been really good against the blitz, and it's not necessarily because of his mobility. So, I think he just can't hold on to the ball that long. And he can't escape the pocket when he needs to. So, find ways to get to the pocket.
I was just thinking about something involving the Sunday night game and how all of a sudden Aaron Rodgers and the Packers were getting called for stuff. Like the Aaron Rodgers getting called for intentional grounding, which I swear hasn't happened since his rookie season.
Well, like 2008 rookie season. Yeah. Also, we saw offensive linemen get called for holding. That was exciting.
How is that a thing? Like, I'm fairly certain that wasn't allowed by anyone wearing a green jersey there. So I suppose it'll be interesting. Kenneth Allen also asks, given that we are going to lose, how does it happen? Zimmer week 1 blues, shift to week 2, Cousins throws 3 picks. Cook's fumbles Delvin Cook fumbles multiple times. What are we looking at?
If it's a loss and if it occurs in a very Vikings fashion, and, Vikings fans are always kind of prepared for that sort of thing to happen, I actually think it won't be unusual. Like, I always try to go for kind of unusual, gut-wrenching losses. If this is a loss, I think it's another Aaron Rodgers comeback story. The Vikings are up by 20 points. He scores 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. Getting rid of the ball in 0.7 seconds
with a peg leg,
each individual throw. Yeah, and it should be very clear and obvious that he can't move. And on the 2-minute of the final drive, he should hobble his way for a first down and run for it. And the Vikings still don't have the ability to close down or something. Like that seems appropriate to me, right?
It seems likely. I think the more likely answer here is that he does this. He does somewhat similar in that he ends up going down and ends up coming back, and we end up getting flagged for it.
And, yeah. But like the Lions' fake face mask.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or he still has the ball, and he ends up getting like pushed over. No one falls on him, but they still throw the flag and say that unneeded pressure was put down on him or something like that.
Right. You could see it could be like a very straightforward like pseudo karmic, except it's Vikings, so it's like just poetic irony thing where the roughing the passer call at the very end of the game is what does them in.
Yep, that's it was going to be a sack. Fourth down, but instead they end up getting half distance to the goal, and then that's it. all she wrote. I think that's what we're looking at. Jeff Wald says, other than Barr versus the fans, what are the big matchups to watch? I like Barr versus the fans.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, Xavier Rhodes, Devonta Adams, if Adams is healthy, Jimmy Graham, Anthony Barr. I don't know. I think in terms of their offense versus the Vikings defense, it's just going to be Aaron Rodgers picking and choosing, so the individual matchups may not matter that much. If Randall Cobb is back to who he was, then, I'm kind of excited for Mike Hughes to kind of track him across the field. On the other side of the ball, I would pay a lot of attention to what Mike Daniels is doing. And if he's lined up against Compton, if he's lined up against Remmers, and if they're going to, showcase that bear front where they're going to have Wilkerson and Clark, and Daniels on the field all at once, and then they're going to have them all lined head up over the guard, center, and guard. That's something to watch out for as an individual matchup. And I just think the normal cornerback, wide receiver matchups are going to be pretty interesting because that's a young but talented group of corners. Those are the highlights.
So scenario from Zen Cupid. Hunter forces Rodgers to step up into the pocket, into the waiting arms of Linval, who then creates a small crater in the shape of Rodgers. After getting up, Rodgers
Looney Tunes style.
Exactly. He took the wrong turn at Albuquerque. After getting up, Rodgers is clutching his other knee and again leaves on a cart. Second half, Rodgers comes out with Sam Bradford eyes. What level of concern are you from 1 to Bears meltdown?
All right, so Rodgers has a sprained knee and a torn knee, maybe, right? Mm-hmm. 2 broken knees. Is he wearing like the double compression sleeve, or like a brace on one and the compression on the other?
I like to think that he actually has a crutch out there.
He's like using it to stiff arm like Everson Griffin.
Exactly. It's legal because it's Rodgers.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's like the Clay Matthews Club. I totally forgot the direction. My level of concern if he comes out with the Sam Bradford eyes specifically, if he's taken the EpiPen shot, it's pretty high. It's Detroit Lions fake face mask. It's not quite Bears meltdown, but it's not far.
No, it's definitely not far. I like the phrase that Sam Bradford eyes is slowly becoming a thing. Dude is constantly startled at all times. Rodgers just has 2 eyes looking in totally different directions, but somehow he's seeing 3 receivers, but he's aiming for the one in the middle and he's making it. So I begrudgingly respect that aspect of it. Kyle Slaby asks, is Arif more of a bully now that he's, quote, made it?
Well, this is more a you question than a me question.
I guess I haven't experienced the bully thing, and I expect the check for saying this will be in the mail, right?
Right, yeah, it's already on its way.
We'll PayPal this; it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think Yinka would say no because I was already a tremendous bully.
I was like, bully or an ass? It's with a bum knee, do you consider dialing up more pressure on Rodgers than usual? Normally, we fear giving him the open lane to scramble because of how deadly he is. This all assumes he isn't faking, like the conspiracy theorists are saying.
Many people are saying. I think dial up more pressure, but I don't think that necessarily means blitzing. I think that means, rushing through your pass lanes with abandon and not necessarily being beholden to gap soundness until he can prove he can run through those lanes and get something out of it. So, you can dial up the pressure without necessarily blitzing. The thing I'm worried about is just holes in coverage, which I'm not saying don't blitz at all. That's crazy. I'm just saying don't deviate from your normal game plan because he's hurt. I think, or from that perspective, I just think you can be kind of more aggressive about what you're doing as a pass rush without having to worry about him scrambling.
So Joe Schneider has an interesting question. And it says, rank the rookie corners for how you think will have the best careers barring injury. It's between Ward, Hughes, Jerry Alexander, and Jackson. And do we have the best of the bunch?
So was a huge fan of Jair Alexander coming out of the draft. He was, I think, my favorite cornerback. Denzel Ward I liked a lot. He might have been second, and I think Mike Hughes. I actually stopped paying attention to corners after that because I didn't really think the Vikings were going to do that much with the corner. Mike Hughes looked really good. I don't think he looked as good as those two, but I thought he was a much better prospect than Josh Jackson. So that's where I'm coming from when I now begin to guess. I would say at the moment, despite the pick six, Alexander's probably ahead. Then it's probably Hughes. Then it's probably Jackson. Then it's probably Ward. They all seem to be playing really well, though. We're gonna have to wait until a bad game for one of them for us to be able to really do it. But yeah, Jesus, what a great group of corners.
It is. It's one of those good problems to have, where it's entirely possible we might actually have the best of the bunch, but I guess we'll have to see.
Right, if they end up with the fourth best of the bunch, it still might be, a Pro Bowl quality corner. Like, who knows?
Yeah. Luke Braun asks, what's the best way to attack a 3-4 with bad linebackers? That seems like the Packers' biggest weakness.
Yeah, I think runs to the outside, passes that try to exploit, like mesh and crossers that try to exploit those linebackers specifically. It's less about 3-4 and more just assume that they're going to be a nickel a lot. And when the Packers are a nickel, that tends to be 2 defensive linemen and 2 outside linebackers. But yeah, I think you can run right at those linebackers. And just find ways around them, and you can still run at those defensive linemen if they're lined up in unusual fronts. You just got to take advantage of the extra holes that offers.
So the next question is from Raul. It says, the Xavier Rhodes top 7 NFC North players list came out on the Players Tribune. What's your top 7? He has a Packers friend who says Bakhtiari deserves the top 3 consideration.
Maybe. Harrison Smith and Aaron Rodgers are at the top in some order.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes kind of boring after that. Like, it's a bunch of friggin' really good players.
Be like, and Rhodes ends up being somewhere in there, but
you put Rhodes in there, maybe. You put Linval in there. You put Everson in there. I think people are down on Everson. I think he's still better than Daniel Hunter right now until Hunter proves otherwise. So
yeah,
Everson.
The inclusion of Matt Stafford was the one thing that was both puzzling weird. And one of those like, okay, well, you have begrudging respect for him as a corner, and he has burned you in very odd ways.
Right.
That sounds like more of like a spring break situation than a quarterback thing, but he's been burned in so many different ways by Matt Stafford that you just have this begrudging respect, like. Obviously, you weren't going to put Trubisky in the on the list, but I don't know.
I wouldn't put Stafford on the list, especially because I would put Darius Slay above him and Golden Tate, who also made the list.
Mm-hmm.
I put Darius Slay above those two. That was kind of weird to me. Probably Mike Daniels makes the list above like Jordan Howard and Golden Tate and all that. But Khalil Mack, he probably is number 2 or 3.
Yeah, Mac made the list with a bullet. Mac was for what was it? For 3 minutes, Khalil Mack was God out there.
Yeah, right. So I guess I go Aaron Rodgers, Harrison Smith, Khalil Mack, 3-way tie for first. Jesus, man, that's crazy. They're all like the best at their position in the NFL. So yeah, there's that. And then behind them, you have some order of Xavier Rhodes, Linval Joseph, Everson Griffin, Akeem Hicks. Christ. I didn't even mention him earlier. And Mike Daniels, just somewhere. And now I think we're already at more than 7. So
yeah, I think that's we're starting to get into dusty territory at this point.
Yeah.
Ted Glover asks a question, and I suppose I'll have to tell my story. Have either you or Arif ever been as high as Aaron Rodgers was during his post-game interview? If so, did you do any interviews, and do tapes of said interviews exist? How about you, Arif?
Well, allegedly, we're mostly that. I mean, he wasn't high at all, so we're always that high. We're just high on life.
We're just high on life and adrenaline.
Yeah. So yeah, all the time, Ted. As for whether if he was if he was that high, no, I've never been that supposedly allegedly high.
All right, so I get to tell my story now. It's story time with James, everyone. So, at the time, I had just turned 22 or something like that. I had just come back from college for like some spring break thing, and it was about to turn to 2 a.m. bar close for Grand Forks and East Grand Forks. They decided to do it together so people didn't crash on the 3 bridges connecting Minnesota to North Dakota. And I ended up at a bar in Grand Forks, in East Grand Forks. I believe it was Whitey's, and it was the first night of 2 a.m. closing, and I was at the bar and I was quite hammered. I was drinking with an Irishman who was challenging me to see if I could drink the way an Irishman drinks a Guinness. And I did him proud, and he rewarded me with shots, and that was kind of the end of that. But I was still kind of functioning. And the local ABC affiliate came in to talk to bar staff about the 2 a.m. closing. And while they were there, they decided that, it's 1:35 in the morning, we should talk to a couple of patrons. Because it's about 2 a.m. I'm sure they're not going to be hammered. The girl I was with was asleep at the table. We were about to leave. We were waiting for our cab. But instead, the news crew comes over to me and asks if I'd like to talk to him about the 2 a.m. closing. Sure.
Why not?
This will be great. This will be fantastic. So I go over to, I stand over where they want me to stand, and we start talking, and I spell out my name 4 times for them. They still manage to get it wrong on the broadcast.
Fantastic.
And they asked me a question. They say, it's 2 a.m. closing. What do you think? And I said, it's not the biggest deal at the moment. If anything, it just means that we'll have like a little bit longer to get ready before going out or whatever. But in the end, it's probably not going to make a huge difference around here. That's what I thought I said. That's what I remember saying. I didn't catch the broadcast initially. I had to see it taped.
Oh, no.
I mentioned the next day, because I was a college student, I was staying at my parents' place, that, hey, I think I was on the news last night, which is always a good thing to say to your parents.
Right.
And I had left before that had happened, and they had taped my segment, and it was the news, and the actual quote of what I said was something along the lines of, gotta get into character here. What I'd actually said was something along the lines of, it's fine, but like, it doesn't matter. It's it's gonna be fine. And then they cut to something else. And it's like, but I had a point. I had there was something there that I needed to say. Like, how is this?
That's amazing.
And that is how I was drunk on the 5:30 news in Grand Forks, North Dakota. That tape has since been destroyed.
I'm sure, yeah.
I happen to know it was destroyed because I'm the one who friggin' did it. So there's that. So that is going to be it for this episode. A little shorter, but we wanted to just make sure we had this out here for the Green Bay game. So again, thank you guys for listening. Arif, let's plug some of your work.
So I've got a piece coming up at The Athletic about what changes to the Packers defense we should expect with Mike Pettin at defensive coordinator. You can see that at theathletic.com.
at theathletic.com. Just a couple of quick notes before we wrap up here. On Thursday, October 18th in New York City at Bar None, we'll be doing our live show. We've had a lot of people saying they're interested in that, so just letting you guys know again, this will be at Bar None in Manhattan, Thursday, October 18th, probably sometime around 9 o'clock. We will not be missing too terrible a Thursday night game, so we will try to endeavor to persevere as far as all that goes. If you would like to donate to the show, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode. So that is going to be it. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening, and please remember to tweet that. And we will see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.